So we're going to finish the play Henry IV, Part 1 tonight. And I'm going to have to skip through and read small chunks instead of great chunks in order to be able to make clear something about the structure of the play. But I think we've already seen enough for you to be able to guess who is the sanguine, roly-poly Santa Claus character in the play, representing the complete devotion to the physical senses in the body, namely, Falstaff. And who is the choleric character who is all heart, all pizzazz, all fight, all glory, and not much rationality upstairs? Hotspur. And then who represents the true and proper government, even though outwardly he doesn't seem it to the other people in the play. To us, we know that he is the representative of rationality governing passion and desire, and that is Prince Hal. So these three characters are, in a sense, competing for England, for the soul of England. What's going to govern England? Is it going to be governed by Prince Hal? Is it going to be governed by Prince Hal as the pet and victim of a Falstaff? Or is it going to be governed by the rebel Hotspur in rebellion with himself and with the king? So the play of those three, the interchange of those three, is the business of the unfolding of the plot, and it takes place in the background, or in the foreground, and in the background is this rebellion being fomented against the king. So we've now come to Act 3, Scene 1, and this is the plotting of the takeover of England from the king by this group that's come together. Who are they? Mortimer, right? He's another cousin of the king. He was the heir apparent according to Richard II. But he's gone to fight Glendower, and in that fight, whatever, we don't know the details because we hear two versions, he's gone over to Glendower, married his daughter, and is part of this conspiracy now. Glendower is the leader of the Welsh, and with them are Hotspur and Worcester. Worcester is Hotspur's uncle. They're the ones that are planning this rebellion against the king to take over England. But what are they going to do with England when they take it over? So let's see. I'll read a little bit of it. Act 3, Scene 1, we'll start with the king looks pale, line 9. With a rising sigh, he wisheth you in heaven, Glendower says to Hotspur. And Hotspur says, and you in hell, as oft as he hears Owen Glendower spoken. That is, King Henry IV wants both Hotspur and Glendower out of his hair. Glendower says, I cannot blame him. At my nativity, the front of heaven was full of fiery shapes, of burning cressets, and at my birth, the frame and huge foundation of the earth shaked like a coward. Hotspur, why so it would have done at the same season if your mother's cat had but kittened, though yourself had never been born. I say the earth did shake when I was born. And I say the earth was not of my mind, if you suppose as fearing you, it shook. The heavens were all on fire, the earth did tremble. And then Hotspur says, oh, it trembled because there was an earthquake. And what's an earthquake? It was a kind of fart in the earth. That's what happened when Glendower was born. So he's needling him. He's kind of shooting pins through the big balloon of Glendower's pride. Mortimer says aside, peace, cousin Percy, you will make him mad. Glendower, line 53. I can call spirits from the vasty deep. And Hotspur says, why, so can I, or so can any man. But will they come when you do call for them? All right, there's a wonderful line, iambic pentameter line, all in monosyllables. But will they come if you do call for them? So spirits and vasty are dissyllables. So we've got Glendower in this bloated ego and Hotspur taking him down. Now, Glendower was known to be a magician, and in the scene he calls up music and it comes by magic, apparently, but it's not made explicit. All right. Then they come to discuss the map. Line 70. Come, here's the map. Shall we divide our right according to our threefold order attained? What have they been planning? Mortimer says, line 72, the Archdeacon hath divided it into three limits very equally. England, from Trent and Severn hitherto, by south and east is to my part assigned. All westward, Wales beyond the Severn shore, and all the fertile land within that bound to Owen Glendower, and, dear coz, to you, the remnant northward lying off from Trent. And our indentures tripartite are drawn. So Trent, the Severn, it's two rivers. It's this river and this river, Trent and Severn. And so everything above the Trent and east of the Severn is going to be Hotspurs. Everything below the Trent and east of the Severn is going to be Mortimer's. And everything west of the Severn is going to be Glendower's. So they're dividing England. Now, what is the problem with dividing England? Later, Shakespeare will make an even bigger deal about this. In what play?
King Lear.
In King Lear.
I was actually going to ask, what are the correspondences between I don't remember it, in Lear, does he say?
He draws he draws England in thirds. He doesn't say where, but he draws it in thirds on the map in a kind of abstract way. And of course, it's set in ancient times, so it's out of the danger of the present issue. But for everybody watching this play at the time, it's another 100 years of civil war, right? Because the minute they agree to divide England when they've won, which they haven't done yet, Hotspur says at line 96, methinks my moiety north from Burton here, moiety means my portion, my division, methinks my moiety north from Burton here in quantity equals not one of yours. See how this river comes me cranking in and cuts me from the best of all my land, a huge half moon, a monstrous cantle out? Cuts me, the me is called the ethical dative. It doesn't mean it cuts me, it cuts for me or in my regard. A cantle out, that is, it takes out a big chunk of my land. I'll have the current of the river in this place dammed up, and here the smug and silver Trent shall run in a new channel, fair and evenly. It shall not wind with such deep indent to rob me of so rich a bottom here. Well, what is Glendower? First of all, what is he asking to do? He wants it equal, and so he's going to redirect the river. So they're not only dividing England, which is the law of nations, but he's redirecting the river, which is the law of nature. Glendower responds, not wind, it shall, it must, you see it doth. Now he's in monosyllables. Mortimer, yea, but mark how he bears his course and runs me up with like advantage on the other side. Runs me up, that's an ethical dative again. Gelding the opposite continent as much as on the other side it takes from you. But Worcester, this is his uncle's teaching. This is Worcester, do you remember? The villain. Yea, but a little charge will trench him here, and on this north side win this cape of land. And then he runs straight and even. So he's on to that. I'll have it so. A little charge will do it. I will not have it altered. Will not you? No, nor you shall not. Who shall say me nay? Why, that will I. Let me not understand you then. Speak it in Welsh. I can speak English, Lord, as well as you. All right, they go on. And in the end, Glendower, the more magnanimous one, says, come, you shall have Trent turned. It's okay, I'll let you move the river. And Hotspur says, do you see where I am, line 135? I do not care. I'll give thrice so much land to any well-deserving friend. But in the way of bargain, mark ye me, I'll cavil on the 9th part of a hair. What's the point here? What's Shakespeare showing us? We're going to divide England by fighting against the king. That's a division in half already, army against army. Once we defeated him, as they presume, we're going to divide it in three. So that's dividing England up. And the immediate effect of division is conflict.
Yeah, another farce.
Instantly. And it's just between the two guys about a little chunk of land. But if you remember from King Lear, the moment the two daughters digest Cordelia's third, what happens? They're ready to go to war with each other, and the only thing that prevents that is the invasion of the French. So it's not a good omen, and it's not a good sign of how England will be ruled if these rebels win. And then it turns out that Mortimer can't speak to his wife, and he's the guy that's going to be running a third of England, and he's married this woman he can't talk to. They can't communicate. They need Glendower to translate. Hotspur and Lady Percy are still fighting what?
She's Welsh.
She's Welsh.
Yes.
Yeah. Hotspur and Lady Percy, his wife, are still kind of bickering. And so the scene ends in bickering. And if we weren't on Henry's side before, we're definitely on his side now, because this does not bode well for England. So, yes?
Is it in another play, I want to think Macbeth, but isn't there another set of characters like this with an Irishman, a Welsh?
Henry V.
And then the next one.
Yeah. They're all four of them, Scot, Irish, English, and Welsh, are fighting with Henry V. He has done the thing that these guys are the opposite. They're dividing. He's trying to unify.
Was Wales a separate country?
I mean, no. I mean, by this time, no. I mean, it was separate. It's always a long, complicated history.
Yes.
But so, yes, they have their own culture and their own all kinds of stuff. But and there's always wars on the border, but eventually the King of England, especially when it's James I who comes down from Scotland, unifies England and Scotland. So Wales becomes part of England. Ireland is, we know, always an issue, always. I mean, Richard II was going off to Ireland to put down the rebels. All right, Act 3, Scene 2. Enter the King, Prince of Wales, and others. King chases the others out, and we're going to have a private conference. This is the conversation that was imitated in Prospect by Falstaff and Prince Hal when they were play acting in the Tavern, right? You remember that? Your father's going to chide you terribly tomorrow. You better practice an answer, and then they change sides and so on. So now this is at the high level. This is what's really happening. The king says, we must have some private conference. And the lords go out. And he says, I know not whether God will have it so for some displeasing service I have done, that in his secret doom out of my blood he'll breed revengement and a scourge for me. But thou dost, he's talking to Prince Hal, in thy passages of life, make me believe that thou art only marked for the hot vengeance and the rod of heaven to punish my mistreadings. Tell me else, could such inordinate and low desires, such poor, such bare, such lewd, such mean attempts, such barren pleasures, rude society, as thou art matched withal and grafted to, accompany the greatness of thy blood and hold their level with thy princely heart? So the king is convinced that Hal has been, sleazing it downtown. And I can't tell you how many critics buy it. History suggests that he was doing that, but Shakespeare does not. He's shown us precisely the opposite. All he's done in the Eastcheap scenes is poke fun at Falstaff for being self-indulgent. Okay, the prince says, so please your majesty, I would I could quit all offenses with as clear excuse, as well as I am doubtless I can purge myself of many I am charged withal. I wish I could excuse all my faults as easily as I can excuse this that you're accusing me of. Yet such extenuation let me beg, as in reproof of many tales devised, which oft the ear of greatness needs must hear, by smiling pickthanks and base newsmongers, I may, for some things true wherein my youth hath faulty, wandered, and irregular, find pardon on my true submission. He's not cluing him in. I'm sorry, I can make apology, I'm not as guilty as people say I am, but he's not telling him it's all an act. He doesn't want him to know because he doesn't want the court to know. Do you understand? He's keeping him in the dark for his own reasons. King, God pardon thee. Yet let me wonder, Harry, at thy affections, which do hold a wing quite from the flight of all thy ancestors. Thy place in council thou hast rudely lost, which by thy younger brother is supplied, and art almost an alien to the hearts of all the court and princes of my blood. The hope and expectation of thy time is ruined. Just what he planned. He wants them to think of him as offering bad hope for the future. And it's working. And the soul of every man prophetically do forethink thy fall. Then he goes to his own past. Had I so lavish of my presence been, so common hackneyed in the eyes of men, so stale and cheap so to vulgar company, opinion that did help me to the crown, had still kept loyal to possession, that is to Richard II, and left me in reputeless banishment, a fellow of no mark nor likelihood. By being seldom seen, I could not stir, but like a comet I was wondered at. That men would tell their children, this is he. Others would say, where? Which is Bolingbroke? And then I stole all courtesy from heaven and dressed myself in such humility that I did pluck allegiance from men's hearts, loud shouts and salutations from their mouths, even in the presence of the crowned king. Thus did I keep my person fresh and new. All right, he goes on and explains this at great length. And what he doesn't realize, but what we do, is that the prince is following exactly that advice, but in reverse. Because what the king, Richard, was doing was showing himself all over the place. He says, the skipping king, line 60, he ambled up and down with shallow jesters and rash baven wits, soon kindled and soon burnt, carded his state, mingled his royalty with capering fools, had his great name profaned with their scorns, and gave his countenance against his name to laugh at jibing boys and stand the push of every beardless vain comparative. Grew companion to the common streets, enfiefed himself to popularity, which is not a good thing. That being daily swallowed by men's eyes, they surfeited with honey and began to loathe the taste of sweetness, whereof a little more than a little is by much too much. So when he had occasion to be seen, he was but as the cuckoo is in June, heard, not regarded, seen, but with such eyes as sick and blunted with community afford no extraordinary gaze, such as is bent on sun-like majesty when it shines seldom in admiring eyes. All right, so Richard was playing all over the place and being silly and being stupid and being common, and nobody paid attention to him. According to the king, nobody paid attention to him when he was behaving like a king. And now he's accusing Hal of doing the same thing as Richard did. But the point is that he is doing it, he's behaving the opposite from his father, because he sees all the rebels resisting Henry IV. And he's got to unify England, and he can do it by shocking people into relief that he turns out not to be another Richard II, not to be a Falstaff or a Bardolph or one of these guys, but to be sober and responsible.
Baven, who's that?
Sorry?
Baven.
Rash Baven wits.
What line?
I don't have a line on my notes. It says, with shallow gestures.
Yeah.
And rash baven.
Baven wits. I have to look it up. Wait, it's
Well, it
3.
says brushwood, which soon burns out. Bathing means brushwood. Soon burns out.
Oh, that's good.
Brush, yeah, just highly flammable
Oh,
brush.
Highly flammable.
Oh, like Tinder.
soon lit and soon goes out. Baven equals kindling. The baven burns bright, but it is but a blaze. All right. So the king now is going to weep. He says at line 87, "Not an eye but is aweary of thy common sight, save mine, which hath desired to see thee more, which now doth that I would not have it do, make blind itself with foolish tenderness." He's weeping. The prince, "I shall hereafter, my thrice gracious lord, be more myself." What does that mean? It means two different things. It means one thing to the king, and it means another thing to us. To the king, it means I will be more the Prince of Wales and eventually King Henry V.
Prince.
Yes. But to us, it means more, it means the same thing. It means more that than he is pretending to be in the meantime. Now the king goes on. He's not mollified yet. "For all the world for all the world, as thou art to this hour, was Richard then, when I from France set foot at Ravensburg. And even as I was then is Percy now. Now by my scepter," now he's going to accuse his son, "and my soul to boot, I'm swearing, he hath more worthy interest to the state than thou, the shadow of succession. For of no right, nor colour like to right, he doth fill fields with harness in the realm, turns head against the lion's armed jaws," that's the king, "and being no more in debt to years than thou," that's not historically accurate, Hotspur was older, but for the sake of the play, they're the same age, "leads ancient lords and reverend bishops on to bloody battles and to bruising arms. What never dying honour hath he got against renowned Douglas," that's the leader of the Scots. Skip ahead a little. "Thrice hath this Hotspur, Mars in swaddling clothes, the god of war, this infant warrior in his enterprises, discomfited great Douglas, ta'en him once, enlarged him, that is, released him, and made a friend of him, to fill the mouth of deep defiance up and shake the peace and safety of our throne. And what say you to this? Percy, Northumberland, the Archbishop's Grace of York, Douglas, Mortimer, capitulate against us and are up," meaning they're raising armies. They've joined together against us. "But wherefore do I tell these news to thee?" Wherefore means why, in case you don't remember. "Why, Harry, do I tell thee of my foes, which are my nearest and dearest enemy? Thou that art like enough through vassal fear, base inclination, and the start of spleen." So vassal fear and base inclination is Falstaff. And start of spleen, it's Hotspur. "To fight against me under Percy's pay, to dog his heels and curtsy at his frowns, to show how much thou art degenerate." Degenerate literally means declined from your generation, from what has generated you, right? From your ancestors. You've gone down. And of course, it means also what we mean by it. Now that's a pretty tough thing to hear. And Prince Hal responds, "Do not think so. You shall not find it so. And God forgive them that so much have swayed your majesty's good thoughts away from me. I will redeem all this on Percy's head, and in the closing of some glorious day be bold to tell you that I am your son, when I will wear a garment all of blood, and stain my favours in a bloody mask, which washed away shall scour my shame with it. And that shall be the day, whene'er it lights, that this same child of honour and renown, this gallant Hotspur, this all-praised knight, and your unthought of Harry chance to meet. For every honour sitting on his helm, would there were multitudes, and on my head my shames redoubled. For the time will come that I shall make this northern youth exchange his glorious deeds for my indignities. Percy is but my factor, good my lord. That is my factotum. He does a job for me that I need doing, to engross up glorious deeds on my behalf. And I will call him to so strict account that he shall render every glory up, yea, even the slightest worship of his time, or I will tear the reckoning from his heart. This in the name of God I promise here, the which if he be pleased I shall perform. I do beseech your majesty may salve the long-grown wounds of my intemperance. If not, the end of life cancels all bands. That's a cliche. Death cancels your debts. And I will die 100,000 deaths ere break the smallest parcel of this vow. Pretty good. I'm not going to fight for Percy against you. I'm going to fight Percy for you and be your son. So that's pretty convincing. And the king is convinced. 100,000 rebels die in this. Thou shalt have charge and sovereign trust herein. All right, that's the real Prince Hal. Not this wastrel that he's created in his reputation.
Would the audience understand this sort of switch?
It's not a switch.
Well, I know, but
That's the great thing. People say it's a switch. Historically, apparently it was a switch. He came to the throne, he got powerful. But in the play, it's not a switch because he told us what he was going to do. Remember that soliloquy?
Yes.
I know you all and will a while uphold the unyoked humor of your idleness, yet herein will I imitate the sun. The sun is parallel to the king. So it was this is a planned transformation. And he's revealing who he really is to the king because he doesn't want the king in despair or falsely accusing him. All right, Act 3, Scene 3. I'm going to skip a lot of this. It's a lot of fun stuff. Just read a little bit. At line 83, the hostess says, I've heard they stole, remember, Falstaff's ring when he was drunk asleep, and the hostess, and he's blaming her for everything, for picking his pockets. And she says, I've heard the prince tell him, I know not how oft that ring was copper. And Falstaff says, how? The prince is a jack, a sneak-up. Splud, and he were here, I would cudgel him like a dog if he would say so. And the prince walks in, probably hearing this. Must we all march? Yes, we're going off to the army. The other night I fell asleep here behind the arras and had my pocket picked. And he says, a ring of my grandfather's, the prince, line 104, a trifle, some 8-penny matter. Hostess, so I told him, my lord, and I said I heard your grace say so, and my lord, he speaks most vilely of you, like a foul-mouthed man as he is, and said he would cudgel you. What? He did not. There's neither faith, truth, nor womanhood in me else. Falstaff, there's no more faith in thee than in a stewed prune. That is a euphemism for a prostitute. Nor no more truth in thee than in a drawn fox. And for womanhood, Maid Marian may be the deputy's wife of the ward to thee. Go, you thing, go. Say, what thing? What thing? What thing? Why, a thing to thank God on. And she takes it as an insult, even though he's hedging his bets, right? Thing to thank God on. I'm no thing to thank God on, I would thou shouldst know it. I'm an honest man's wife, and setting thy knighthood aside, thou art a knave to call me so. And he says, setting thy womanhood aside, thou art a beast to say otherwise. What beast? And then they go on. And finally, she says, the prince says, he slanders thee most grossly, and the hostess says, so doth you, my lord, and said this other day, you ought him £1,000, that you owed him £1,000. Sirrah, he says to Falstaff, do I owe you £1,000? Falstaff, £1,000, Hal? 1,000,000. Thy love is worth 1,000,000. Thou owest me thy love. Nay, my lord, says the hostess, he called you Jack and said he would cudgel you. Did I, Bardolph? Indeed, Sir John, you said so. Yea, if he said my ring was copper. Prince, I say 'tis copper. Darest thou be as good as thy word now? So Falstaff is never without his answer, right? Why, Hal, thou knowest as thou art but man, I dare. But as thou art prince, I fear thee as I fear the roaring of the lion's whelp. And why not as the lion? The king himself is to be feared as the lion. Dost thou think I'll fear thee as I fear thy father? Nay, and I do, pray God, my girdle break. Oh, if it should, how would thy guts fall about thy knees? But, sir, there's no room for faith, truth, nor honesty in this bosom of thine. It is all filled up with guts and midriff. So they go on back and forth. And he's giving Jack Falstaff a company of foot soldiers. And Falstaff says, I would it had been of horse. He wants to lead horse soldiers. He doesn't want to lead foot soldiers. It means he has to march. All right. Falstaff closes the scene with a rhyme couplet 205. Rare words, brave world, hostess, my breakfast come. Oh, I could wish this tavern were my drum. He doesn't want to go to war. Why? We've already seen it. He's a coward. He's not going to fight. But it's the only way to get out of jail or hanging. So he's going to do it. All right, in the next scene, Act 4, Scene 1, Hotspur, Worcester, and Douglas get news that Northumberland, Hotspur's father, and his army aren't showing up. And that Glendower may or may not show up. And Hotspur thinks of it as a gash, and then he says, oh, well, it's the more honor for us. Okay, we fight with fewer men, it's more honor when we win. Line 77, it lends a luster and more great opinion. Vernon comes in, and Hotspur asks him about the prince. Vernon says at line 90, I have learned the king himself in person is set forth, or hitherwards intended speedily with strong and mighty preparation. Hotspur shall be welcome too. Where is his son? Where is his son, the nimble-footed madcap Prince of Wales, and his comrades, that daft the world aside and bid it pass? Vernon, all furnished, all in arms, all plumed like estridges, that with the wind baited like eagles having lately bathed, glittering in golden coats like images, as full of spirit as the month of May, and gorgeous as the sun at midsummer, wanton as youthful goats, wild as young bulls. I saw young Harry with his beaver on, that's the helmet that has a face covering over it. His cuisses on his thighs, gallantly armed, rise from the ground like feathered Mercury, and vaulted with such ease into his seat as if an angel dropped down from the clouds to turn and wind a fiery Pegasus and witch the world with noble horsemanship. All right, this is his enemy, right? This is Vernon fighting on the side of Worcester and Hotspur, saying this, which means what? What are we to experience from this? This is, well, we could say divinely ordained, or at least magnificent. But this sounds like the man who should be the Prince of Wales and running England, not a Hotspur, a Mortimer. No more, says Hotspur. Worse than the sun in March this praise doth nourish ages. Let them come. They come like sacrifices in their trim, and to the fire-eyed maid of smoky war, all hot and bleeding will we offer them. The mailed Mars shall on his altar sit up to the ears in blood. I am on fire to hear this rich reprisal is so nigh, and yet not ours. Come, let me taste my horse, who is to bear me like a thunderbolt against the bosom of the Prince of Wales. Harry to Harry shall hot horse to horse meet in their part till one drop down a corse. Corse is corpse. All those H's are the Hotspur hotness, right? The choleric, passionate, fighting Hotspur. I've often seen him played as a redhead. My mother was a redhead, fiery redhead, according to my father. And then they find out that Glendower can't come for weeks. Hotspur says, never mind. And the Douglas, I am out of fear. Let's go. All right, Act 4, Scene 2. So even the enemies are being doled out an image of the prince as this great uplifting being. All right, now what's Hotspur going to do leading his soldiers? I mean, not Hotspur, Falstaff. He sends Bardolph to go get drink, and Bardolph wants money, and he says, lay out, pay. And you owe me money already, says Bardolph. I'll meet you later. And then he has a soliloquy, improse, Falstaff. If I be not ashamed of my soldiers. All right, so what is the situation? Falstaff has been given the charge to impress, that means draft, soldiers. And that he could go to towns and under the authority of the king, call up soldiers. Impress them, meaning draft them, whether they will or no. But one of the things people could do is buy out their service. If they had any money, they could pay him off. He could use the money to hire other soldiers, and they wouldn't have to go. What Falstaff has done, as you'll see now. If I be not ashamed of my soldiers, I must soused gird it. I have misused the king's press damnably. I have got in exchange of 150 soldiers 300 and odd pounds. So that is 150 real soldiers have bought out their service and given him 300 and odd pounds. I press me none but good householders, yeomen's sons, inquire me out contracted bachelors, such as had been asked twice on the bands about to be married. Such a commodity of warm slaves as had as leave hear the devil as a drum, such as fear the report of a caliver worse than a struck fowl or a hurt wild duck. I pressed me none but such toasts and butter, with hearts in their bellies no bigger than pins' heads, and they have bought out their services. Okay? So he pressed only the kind of people who had a reason not to go. They're just about to get married, they're fat, they're well-heeled, they're going to pay him. And now my whole charge consists of ancients, corporals, lieutenants, gentlemen of companies, slaves as ragged as Lazarus in the painted cloth where the glutton's dogs licked his sores. So all his officers are really these absolutely hopeless, beggarly creatures. Such as indeed were never soldiers, but discarded, unjust serving men, younger sons to younger brothers, revolted tapsters, and ostlers trade fallen. We saw ostlers in that earlier scene in the inn, remember? And we saw tapsters, and we saw Prince Hal trying to invite Francis, the tapster, to revolt. And he didn't. He's not even courageous enough to revolt. So that's the kind of guy that Falstaff has got. The cankers of a calm world and a long peace, 10 times more dishonorable ragged than an old-phased ancient. And such have I to fill up the rooms of them as have bought out their services, that you would think I had 150 tattered prodigals lately come from swine keeping, from eating draff and husk. Remember the story of the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son. A mad fellow met me on the way, and told me I had unloaded all the gibbets and pressed the dead bodies. No eye hath seen such scarecrows. I'll not march through Coventry with them, that's flat. Nay, and the village marked wide betwixt the legs, as if they had gyves on, for indeed I had the most of them out of prison. There's not a shirt and a half in all my company, and the half shirt is 2 napkins tacked together and thrown over the shoulders like a herald's coat without sleeves. And the shirt, to say the truth, stolen from my host at St. Albans, or the red-nosed innkeeper of Daventry. But that's all one. They'll find linen enough on every hedge. They're going to make their own clothes by stealing linen, like Autolycus in the Winter's Tale, from the hedges where they're drying. So in comes the prince and the lord of Westmorland. How now, blown, Jack? Blown. You know the term fly blown? A flower blows when it blossoms. Fly blown means your skin has been impregnated with grubs, larvae, and
Maggots.
And they finally come to birth, and that's called fly blown. So Jack is blown, meaning he's blown up to fatness, and he's overblown, in his ego and in his age. And he's, of course, corrupt, like Flyblow. What how? How now, man-wag? What the devil dost thou in Warwickshire? My good Lord of Westmoreland, I cry you mercy. I thought your honour had already been at Shrewsbury. Well, faith, Sir John, 'tis more than time that I were there, and you too. But tell me, Jack, says the prince, line 60, whose fellows are these that come after? Mine, Hal, mine. I did never see such pitiful rascals. Ah, good enough to toss. Food for powder, food for powder. They'll fill a pit as well as better. Tush man, mortal man, mortal man. They'll fill a pit as well as better. Does he care about winning the battle? No, he would have taken real soldiers. Does he care whether they live or die? No. Aye, but Sir John, methinks they are exceeding poor and bare, too beggarly. Faith, for their poverty, I know not where they have that, and for their bareness, I am sure they never learned that of me. No, I'll be sworn unless you call 3 fingers in the ribs bare, but Sirrah, make haste, Percy is already in the field. And Falstaff ends the scene alone, saying, well, to the latter end of a fray and the beginning of a feast fits a dull fighter and a keen guest. You come at the beginning of a feast because you're hungry, but you come at the end of a battle because you don't want to fight. All right, Act 4, Scene 3. It's like 3-1. The rebels are fighting among themselves. They're not actually fighting, but they're debating. When should we attack? Should we attack tonight or should we attack tomorrow? Here are the reasons to attack tonight. Here are the reasons to attack tomorrow. And they're bickering, essentially. In comes Blunt, Sir Walter Blunt. And he offers them a way to make peace. Hotspur says at line 36, at 33, would to God you were of our determination, but instead you stand against us like an enemy. Line 38, Blunt, and God defend, but still I should stand so long as out of limit and true rule you stand against anointed majesty. But to my charge, this is my job, to report the following. The king hath sent to know the nature of your griefs, and whereupon you conjure from the breast of civil peace such bold hostility, teaching his duteous land audacious cruelty. If that the king have any way your good deserts forgot, which he confesseth to be manifold, that is, your deserts to be manifold, he bids you name your griefs, and with all speed you shall have your desires with interest, and pardon absolute for yourself and these herein misled by your suggestion. Suggestion here means temptation. And then Hotspur goes through a very long speech about how King Henry IV came back to England saying he only wanted Lancaster, and then he rose up and neglecting, of course, that it was his own father and himself that helped put him on the throne. Cut me off the heads of all the favorites that the absent king and deputation left behind in here, line 85. And Blunt says, I came not to hear this. Come on. He deposed the king, deprived him of life, suffered his kinsman march, that is Mortimer, who is, if every owner were well placed, indeed his king, line 95, to be engaged in Wales, there without ransom to be forfeited, disgraced me in my happy victories, sought to entrap me by intelligence, rated mine uncle from the council board, enraged dismissed my father from the court, broke oath on oath, committed wrong on wrong, and in conclusion, drove us to seek out this head, meaning army of safety, and withal to pry into his title, the which we find too indirect for long continuance. His title to the throne is too indirect for long continuance. Remember, he's got a point, 1 point, and that is how Henry came by the throne rather than Mortimer. But we've already seen that Mortimer is not trying to be a pretender to the throne and unite England under him. He's content to marry Glendower's daughter and divide up England. So it's a really bad judgment. Blunt, shall I return this, parenthesis, long answer to the king? No, we're going to talk about it. Okay, so there's a pause. Act 4, Scene 4 is one of those little scenes that shows what's happening. Archbishop and Sir Michael are discussing, and they're part of the conspiracy, they're part of the rebellion. And they're talking about who's got more soldiers and who's coming up and who's flaking. And through the scene, the tide turns. We start to feel, okay, they're not going to make peace, but they're not going to be sufficient to defeat the king. And our sense of the movement of time is on the side of King Henry and not on the side of the rebels. If Percy thrive not, ere the king dismiss his power, he means to visit us. So if he defeats Percy, then he's going to come after us. So make haste and call up men, right? Build an army. But it's sounding pretty desperate. All right, Act 5, Scene 1, we're at the camp at Shrewsbury, where the battle is going to take place. And Worcester comes in to report what their decision is about the offer carried by Blunt. You with me? And the king says to him, how now, line 9, how now, my lord of Worcester? I'm in Act 5, Scene 1, line 9. 'Tis not well that you and I should meet upon such terms as now we meet. You have deceived our trust and made us doff our easy robes of peace to crush our old limbs in ungentle steel. This is not well, my lord, this is not well. Monosyllables. Bam, 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 bam. What say you to it? Will you again unknit the churlish knot of all abhorred war, and move in that obedient orb again, where you did give a fair and natural light, and be no more an exhaled meteor? A prodigy of fear, and a portent of broached mischief to the unborn times? The king's the center, like the sun, and around him go these, of course they didn't think the planets went around the sun yet, they went around the earth, but all the other planets were subordinate to the sun, and here is this exhaled meteor with a path, not circular motion, which is perfect motion, but direction, and it's rumination. And of course, meteors also portended bad omens for the future. So Worcester says, for mine own part, I could well be content to entertain the lag end of my life with quiet hours. For I do protest I have not sought this day, the day of this dislike. You have not sought it, how comes it then? Falstaff pipes up from the sideline. Rebellion lay in his way, and he found it. The prince tells him to shut up. All right, Worcester goes into a whole long speech, parallel kind of to Hotspur's. You swore to us that you were only here for Lancaster and not to take the kingdom, and we swore to support you, but pretty soon the flood of greatness fell on you, and you became the king, and you killed the king, etc., etc. And then you did oppress our nest, grew by our feeding, line 62, to so great a bulk that even our love durst not come near your sight for fear of swallowing, but with nimble wing we were enforced for safety's sake to fly out of your sight and raise this present head, that means army, whereby we stand opposed by such means as you yourself have forged against yourself by unkind usage, dangerous countenance, and violation of all faith and troth sworn to us in your younger enterprise. All right, this is very reminiscent of Richard II, right? When Bolingbroke is telling him what he's got to do. Yes?
Is it true?
Is what true?
What Worcester says.
Well, it's only partly true.
Yeah.
Worcester and Northumberland and Hotspur helped him to the crown. They wanted him to be king. But why? In this play, it turns out, it's because they thought, if we make him king, then he has to be grateful to us, and he'll do what we say, and he won't harm us. So when Hotspur says, I didn't deny the prisoners, I'm not giving him a damn prisoner. He won't ransom my brother-in-law Mortimer. They're telling the king what to do. So where's the sovereignty in that? Is he going to be beholden to them all his life and do politically only what they approve of? Of course not. So, of course, he's speaking from a point of view, and he's making it worse than it is. The king says, "These things indeed you have articulate, proclaimed at market crosses, read in churches to face the garment of rebellion with some fine color that may please the eye of fickle changelings and poor discontents, which gape and rub the elbow at the news of hurly-burly innovation." I think I said this, innovation is bad in Shakespeare. If it's new, if it's innovative, it's worse. Not because, nothing new can be good, but because the world itself is on a decline to the ending doom from its beginning creation in perfection.
My gloss says, has rebellion for innovation.
Well, that's an example of innovation as rebellion. Hurly-burly means kind of violent. But what he's saying is, you are using all this speech you just gave to color, to cover, to put the makeup on what you're really doing, which is rebellion. And that's destructive of the order of the world and of England. And never yet did insurrection want, meaning lack, such watercolors to impaint his cause, nor moody beggars starving for a time of pell-mell havoc and confusion. All right, so any rebellion against the king is to foment confusion, pell-mell, havoc, hurly-burly. These are all negatives. Now the prince steps forward. "In both your armies there is many a soul shall pay full dearly for this encounter, if once they join in trial, that is, if we go to battle. Tell your nephew, Hotspur, the Prince of Wales doth join with all the world in praise of Henry Percy. By my hopes, which is the hope to be the king, this present enterprise set off his head, not counting this. I do not think a braver gentleman, more active, valiant, or more valiant young, more daring, or more bold, is now alive to grace this latter age with noble deeds." This is that great, wild horse, the tameable horse of the heart, of the will, of the passion, the choleric man, the fighter. He's recognizing all his good qualities. If he fought for the king, as he did against Douglas, he'd be a great prop to the monarch. Now he says, "For my part, I may speak it to my shame, I have a truant been to chivalry." Okay, yes, outwardly he has, but not in fact. He's promoting future chivalry by fooling people temporarily. "And so I hear he doth account me too. Yet this before my father's majesty. I am content that he shall take the odds of his great name and estimation, and will, to save the blood on either side, try fortune with him in a single fight." Just what he promised the king he would do in that speech he gave the king. "Let nobody else die. Let it be between me and Hotspur. And however it goes, that's how it will go." And the king, wisely, says, "And Prince of Wales, so dare we venture thee, albeit consideration infinite do make against it." No, good Worcester, no, he decides not to do it, not to risk the whole thing on his son. "We love our people well, and even those we love that are misled upon your cousin's part. And will they take the offer of our grace? Both he and they and you, yea, every man shall be my friend again, and I'll be his." So he's willing to forgive him this insurrection if they swear loyalty and disperse the army. "So tell your cousin, and bring me word what he will do. But if he will not yield, rebuke and dread correction wait on us," that's the royal plural, "and they shall do their office. So be gone, we will not now be troubled with reply. We offer fair, take it advisedly." He goes out. "The prince, who will not be accepted on my life, the Douglas and the Hotspur both together are confident against the world in arms." So the king said, "All right, let's get to battle." And then on the side, Falstaff says to the prince, "Hal, if thou see me down in the battle and bestride me, so, 'tis a point of friendship. Now, first of all, he's calling him thou, which is the intimate, right? You never say that to your prince if you're just... So he's speaking to him like his bosom friend. He wants him, if he sees Falstaff down in the battle, to stand over him like this and defend him. And the prince says, nothing but a colossus can do thee that, friendship. Say thy prayers and farewell. I would 'twere bedtime, Helen, all well. Why, thou owest God a death. Now, this is classic. It's true of every man. The whole tradition is that man is fallen and the punishment for the fall is death. So however you live your life, you owe God a death. Now, that may lead to redemption if you have faith and repentance, or it may not. But there's no escaping the death. So what do you do if you owe God a death and you're about to go into battle? What do? You repent. You say your prayers. But Falstaff has a catechism. 'Tis not due yet, my death. I would be loath to pay him before his day. What need I be so forward with him that calls not on me? Well, 'tis no matter. Honor pricks me on. Remember I told you this play was going to be about what honor is? Well, 'tis no matter. Honor pricks me on. Yea, but how if honor prick me off when I come on? So pricks me on like you prick the sides of a horse with your spurs. And pricks me off is stabs him so that he dies. How if honor prick me off when I come on? How then? Can honor set to a leg? No. Or an arm? No. Or take away the grief of a wound? No. Honor hath no skill in surgery then? No. What is honor? A word. What is that word, honor? Air, a trim reckoning. Who hath it? He that died a Wednesday. Doth he feel it? No. Doth he hear it? No. 'Tis insensible then? Yea, to the dead. But will it not live with the living? No. Why? Detraction will not suffer it. That is ruin of your reputation by people who are detracting from your reputation. They say bad things about you after you're dead, and it ruins your reputation. So detraction will not suffer, will not allow honor to live with the living. Therefore, I am none of it. Honor is a mere scutcheon, and so ends my catechism. A scutcheon is the coat of arms that is placed on a coffin of someone whose family has a coat of arms. And he's buried with that symbol of the house on the coffin. And so that's all honor is. It's just this external symbol. It's nothing. Now, we started by talking about, is it real? Is there such a thing as honor? And Falstaff here, in this catechism, is denying the reality of any abstract reality. This brings up, and it's perfect for Falstaff to embody it, the great medieval debate between the realists and the nominalists. The nominalists, and we're still having this debate now, it's gone on for 1,000 years. The nominalists say that an abstraction like honor or life or any abstract thing like that is simply a name that we use to intellectually aggregate a lot of particular examples of something. It's not any real thing in itself. It's just a name. Some of you may have read that novel by Umberto Eco called The Name of the Rose. That's what it's about. The realists believed that God had created man and the world and qualities. That qualities are actually real, that they inhere in particular things, but they are not nothing. They are not visible. They are not touchable. And of course, the Christian theologians get this largely from Plato, whose whole thrust is that the concept in the mind is more real. The idea, the abstract universal is more real than all the particulars that embody it. You know, individuals come and go, but truth is truth, or honor is honor, or God is God. And so Falstaff embodies essentially the nominalist heresy, that honor is nothing but a word is nothing but air, you can't touch it, you can't feel it can't cure your wounds. Oh, forget it, I'm not into that. I'm into not getting wounds. That's all that matters, forget honor. Now, if Hotspur had to define honor, how would he define it? We're going to see him do it at the end of his life, but how would he define it?
Courage.
Bravery and valor and fighting.
The reputation that you win through bravery, courage, fighting, and defeating everybody. And the higher the guy you've defeated, the more honor. So he really believes in honor. But he doesn't care who he fights to get it. If it's the king, fine. Do you see? So, if we ask Prince Hal what honor is, so the end of the play is going to answer. Now, here's a perfect example of dishonor. Worcester, in Act 5, Scene 2, is walking with Vernon back to the camp. And he says, they're in the middle of a conversation, and he says, "Oh no, my nephew must not know, Sir Richard, the liberal and kind offer of the king. Don't tell Hotspur what the king offered." "'Twere best he did know it," says Vernon, who's the one who noticed how great Prince Hal was. Not that he's not a rebel, but he's got honor. And Worcester says, "Then are we all undone? It is not possible. It cannot be. The king should keep his word in loving us. He will suspect us still," meaning always, "and find a time to punish this offense in other faults. Supposition all our lives shall be stuck full of eyes, for treason is but trusted like the fox, who ne'er so tame, so cherished and locked up, will have a wild trick of his ancestors. Look how we can, of his ancestors. Look how we can, or sad or merrily, interpretation will misquote our looks, and we shall feed like oxen at a stall, the better cherished, still the nearer death." It's going to be slaughtered for food. "My nephew's trespass may be well forgot. It hath the excuse of youth and heat of blood, and an adopted name of privilege, a hair-brained Hotspur governed by a spleen. All his offenses live upon my head and on his father's." And that's partly true. This is his uncle's teaching. This is Worcester, remember? "We did train him on," as they would say, "we did train him on. And his corruption being tamed from us, we as the spring of all shall pay for all. Therefore, good cousin, let not Harry know in any case the offer of the king." All right, now what's happening in this speech? First of all, he did train him on. He's the one that came up with this plot. He's the one that seduced Hotspur into it. Secondly, he's accusing the king, even if we lay down our arms and are forgiven for this, the king will always be suspicious. For treason is but trusted like the fox. Now, in saying this, he is making it true in the sense that the king ought to mistrust him. He's using this as an excuse to continue with the treason. So why wouldn't the king mistrust him? Do you see? In other words, he's proving that the accusation he's making against the king in the hypothetical future, he's proving to be valid by being a traitor. So the king's right.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. All right, so Vernon says, "Deliver what you will, I'll say to so." Here comes your cousin. So Vernon lies. Worcester lies. Worcester says at line 36, I told him gently of our grievances, of his oath breaking, which he mended thus, by now forswearing that he is forsworn. He calls us rebels, traitors, and will scourge with haughty arms this hateful name in us. So he didn't offer us peace. He didn't say we should tell him our wrongs and he'll forgive us and try to make it right, which is what he did say. He said, you traitors, we're going to defeat you, and that's it. So he lies to Hotspur. And then he is told by Worcester, the Prince of Wales stepped forth before the king and nephew challenged you to single fight. He does tell him that. And Hotspur says, line 46, 47, oh, would the quarrel lay upon our heads, and that no man might draw short breath today, but I and Harry Monmouth. Tell me, how showed his tasking? Seemed it in contempt? Vernon again. No, by my soul. I never in my life did hear a challenge urged more modestly, unless should a brother dare to gentle exercise and proof of arms. He gave you all the duties of a man, trimmed up your praises, trimmed means decorated, like trimming a Christmas tree, trimmed up your praises with a princely tongue, spoke your deservings like a chronicle, making you ever better than his praise by still dispraising praise valued with you, and which became him like a prince indeed. He made a blushing recital of himself, and chid his truant youth with such a grace, as if he mastered there a double spirit of teaching and of learning instantly. There did he pause. But let me tell the world, if he outlive the envy of this day, England did never owe so sweet a hope, so much misconstrued in his wantonness. Vernon gets it. People are being fooled by this wantonness. He's not really like that. And he says the envy of this day. What is it that makes rebels rebel against the rightful king? And a good king, relatively speaking. Envy. I want it. And what makes Hotspur fight with Glendower about turning the river Trent? Envy. Your land's more than mine.
And greed.
Yes. Greed is, you know how the church defines the 7 deadly sins, or the root sins, that all the others come out of these things. And whenever you have one of them, you're bound to be falling into all of them. So envy and greed go together. You're not going to be greedy if you don't envy other people's valuables. All right, so he speaks. There's messengers. He doesn't want to read the news. We're going to find out in part 2 that Northumberland, for his own safety, has stayed away from this battle.
His own father?
His own father. All right, the Douglas comes in with Blunt. The king has got lots of people running around in his costume, so they think they're killing the king, but they're not killing the king. He fights. Douglas kills Blunt. Douglas says, all's done, all's won. Here breathless lies the king. Where? Here. This Douglas? No, I know this face full well. A gallant knight he was. His name was Blunt. Semblably furnished like the king himself. So Douglas is disappointed.
Isn't that kind of dirty pool to have everybody dressed like the king?
Sort of
It's a strategy.
Where does honor lie? It's a great question. It's a question for the play. In part 2, Prince John lies to the rebels and they go away. And then he arrests them. Is that dirty pool? You lie to the Taliban who blown up the World Trade Center. They're people. By saying, "Oh, we're coming to help you," and then take them out, like this guy that just blew away with the drone a few weeks ago. Do you tell them what you're doing? "Oh, we're going to come and get you with the drone on Tuesday." After all, it's only fair to warn you. No, it's not. Does he warn them? You have to kill him. You have to defeat the enemy. Because if you're fighting for the right, and they are in rebellion and they're in the wrong, whatever techniques you have to use, you use to re-establish the order of the world, the hierarchy.
The higher goal.
That's right. It's not just that all's fair in love and war. It's that fairness is defined by the ultimate purpose, and not just by the means. Although the means do matter, and after all, the prince didn't lie to anybody about being willing to fight Hotspur. He was. But Falstaff is of the opposite. So they all go out and enter Falstaff alone. Line 30, Act 5, Scene 3, line 30. "Though I could escape shot-free at London, I fear the shot here." Shot in London means the scoring on a piece of wood of the tally of how much you've eaten and drunk. So he escapes without paying for his drink and his food in London. But he's afraid of not escaping the different kind of shot, that is gunshot here. Here's no scoring, that is, you take a nail and you draw a line on a board. You're scoring it, and that's where we get our word score from in all sports. It's a score. It's writing down on a board with a nail or a dagger or something what you owe, how much you've had. So here's no scoring with a dagger, but upon the pate, meaning the head. And then he sees Sir Walter Blunt dead. "Soft, who are you?" "Sir Walter Blunt. There's honor for you. Here's no vanity. I am as hot as molten lead, and as heavy too. God keep lead out of me. I need no more weight than mine own bowels. I have led my ragamuffins where they are peppered with shot. There's not 3 of my 150 left alive. And they are for the Townsend to beg during life, meaning they're so wounded that they won't be able to do anything to make a living. They'll be beggars. 3 out of 150. The others are all dead. But he's not dead. I've led my ragamuffins where they are peppered with shot. So at this point, the fun of Falstaff, the liveliness, the wit, the hilarity, the delight, is tempered by the actual effect on real people in the real world. And in this battle, which he was given a charge for in order to earn his way out of jail and out of the thieving, he turns to his own selfish purposes at the expense of 147 lives of people who weren't guilty of anything except being poor.
And he has no remorse.
And he has no remorse. Food for powder, he said before. And that's what they became. So the prince comes in. What, standst thou idle here? Lend me thy sword. Many a nobleman lies stark and stiff, being dead, under the hoofs of vaunting enemies, whose deaths are yet unrevenged. I prithee, lend me thy sword. Oh, have, I prithee, give me leave to breathe a while. Turk Gregory never did such deeds in arms as I have done this day. I have paid Percy, I have made him sure. Braggadocio. That's another of the old tropes of the earlier theater. Another character, the braggart soldier. And Falstaff is all braggart and no soldier. I have made him sure, meaning killed him. He is indeed sure, and living to kill thee. I prithee, lend me thy sword. Nay, before God, Hal, if Percy be alive, thou gettest not my sword. But take my pistol if thou wilt. Give it me. What, is it in the case? Is your pistol in the case? Aye, Hal, 'tis hot, 'tis hot. There's that will sack a city. Prince opens it up and finds that it's a bottle of sack, a leather bottle of sack. What, is it a time to jest and dally now? He throws it at him and goes out. So I want you to remember this. When part 2 comes and he's banished 10 miles away from the prince, remember this moment. Falstaff, well, if Percy be alive, this is Solus alone. If Percy be alive, I'll pierce him. This probably is a closer pun in Shakespearean pronunciation than ours. If Percy be alive, I'll pierce him. If he do come in my way, so. If he do not, if I come in his willingly, let him make a carbonado of me. That's a beaten piece of tough meat that you put on the fire after you beat it. I like not such grinning honor as Sir Walter hath. Give me life, which if I can save, so. If not, honor comes unlooked for, and there's an end. Act 5, Scene 4. Okay, this is the last, next to last scene. The battle. Alarms and excursions. Lord John of Lancaster is bleeding, is not bleeding, but he wants to keep fighting. The prince is bleeding, but he's not going to retire. Lead me, my lord, I do not need your help, and God forbid a shallow scratch to drive the Prince of Wales from such a field as this, where stained nobility lies trodden on. We've seen Sir Blow-off blood killed, and rebels' arms triumph in massacres. John, we grieve too long. Come, cousin Westmoreland. Our duty this way lies. For God's sake, come. And the prince, after he goes out, his brother goes out. By God, thou hast deceived me, Lancaster. He's the Duke of Lancaster. So the king is the king, and Prince Hal is the Prince of Wales, and his next brother is John, Duke of Lancaster. I did not think thee lord of such a spirit. Before I loved thee as a brother, John, but now I do respect thee as my son. I saw him hold Lord Percy at the point with lustier maintenance than I did look for such an ungrown warrior. So even the younger brother has faced Percy and faced him down. Oh, this boy lends mettle to us all. Enter the Douglas. Another king, they grow like hydras' heads. So the prince has gone out, and the king is there, and in comes the Douglas. I am the Douglas, fatal to all those that wear those colors on them. What art thou that counterfeits the person of a king? The king himself, whom Douglas grieves at heart, so many of his shadows thou hast met, and not the very king. I have 2 boys seek Percy and thyself about the field, but seeing thou fall'st on me so luckily, I will essay thee, so defend thyself. All right, this is the king. He's going to fight the Douglas, one of the greatest of the fighters of the time. Now, how old is this king? He's still fighting. Maybe he's 40, maybe he's 45. He's got a 20-year-old son and some younger ones. But he's not 22. I fear thou art another counterfeit, says Douglas, and yet in faith thou bearest thee like a king. But mine I am sure thou art, whoe'er thou be, and thus I win thee. They fight. The king being in danger, says the stage direction, enter Prince of Wales. Hold up thy head, vile Scot, or thou art like never to hold it up again. The spirits of valiant Shirley, Stafford, Blunt, those are the dead peers on the king's side, are in my arms. It is the Prince of Wales that threatens thee, who never promiseth, but he means to pay. They fight, and the Douglas flieth. He can't defeat him, he runs off. Now he turns to the king. Cheerly, my lord, how fares your grace? Sir Nicholas Gauzy hath for succour sent, and so hath Clifton, out to Clifton straight. King, stay and breathe a while. Thou hast redeemed thy lost opinion, and showed thou makest some tender of my life in this fair rescue thou hast brought to me. And the prince says, O God, they did me too much injury, that ever said I hearkened for your death. If it were so, I might have let alone the insulting hand of Douglas over you, which would have been as speedy in your end as all the poisonous potions in the world, and saved the treacherous labor of your son, if I had been treacherous. Make up to Clifton altar Sir Nicholas Gauze. Excellent. Hotspur enters to the prince. If I mistake not, thou art Harry Monmouth. Thou speakst as if I would deny my name. My name is Harry Percy. Why, then I see a very valiant rebel of that name, of the name. Valiant rebel. Everything is contained in that epithet. Everything about his heart, that second soul, the sensible soul, everything about his passion, his choleric nature, valiant. And yet, he's a rebel. He is not in the service of the king. He's not in the service of his higher self, of intellect. I am the Prince of Wales, and think not, Percy, to share with me in glory any more. 2 stars keep not their motion in one sphere, nor can one England brook a double reign of Harry Percy and the Prince of Wales. And Hotspur says, nor shall it, Harry, for the hour is come to end the one of us, and would to God thy name in arms were now as great as mine. Why? I wish your name were as famous for courage as my name is. Why?
More honor.
Yeah.
More honor when I kill you. And Prince says, I'll make it greater ere I part from thee. And all the budding honors on thy crest I'll crop to make a garland for my head. I can no longer brook thy vanities. Okay, this is what the prince has been accused of. Vanity. They fight. Enter Falstaff on the side, watching them. Well said, Hal. To it, Hal. Nay, you shall find no boys' play here, I can tell you. Enter the Douglas. He fighteth with Falstaff, who falls down as if he were dead. Exit the Douglas, and the prince killeth Percy. So the Douglas apparently kills Falstaff, and the prince apparently kills Percy. And Hotspur's last speech, line 75 or so. O Harry, thou hast robbed me of my youth. I better brook the loss of brittle life than those proud titles thou hast won of me. I don't care to be dying so much. I care to lose those honors, what he means by honor. They wound my thoughts worse than thy sword my flesh. But thoughts, the slaves of life, and life, time's fool, and time that takes survey of all the world must have a stop. Oh, I could prophesy, because on your deathbed you are given, some people are given vision. They see things clearly, and they speak the truth. But that the earthy and cold hand of death lies on my tongue. No, Percy, thou art dust, and food for empty feet. What do we mean by empty feet? We expect an iambic pentameter line, bump, 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 bump. What we get is, and food for bump, 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 bump. And then the prince finishes the thought. For worms, brave Percy, fare thee well, great heart. Ill-weaved ambition. Now remember that ambition doesn't mean, yes, I want to be a doctor someday and help people and make money and give to the poor. No. It means trying to rise to a position that is above your station, trying to be the king when you're only not the king, or trying to be anybody higher than you actually are. So ill-weaved ambition, how much art thou shrunk? When that this body did contain a spirit, a kingdom for it was too small about. But now 2 paces of the vilest earth is room enough. This earth that bears thee dead, bears not alive so stout a gentleman. If thou wert sensible of courtesy, I should not make so dear a show of zeal. But let my favours hide thy mangled face, and even in thy behalf I'll thank myself for doing these fair rites of tenderness. Adieu, and take thy praise with thee to heaven, thy ignominy sleep with thee in the grave, but not remembered in thy epitaph. Now, he has won those titles of Percy, but he doesn't locate honor in mere external reputation. He knows that honor is judged in the eyes of God, not in the eyes of men, not in the eyes of the person who has it, or wants it, or loses it. Nobody sees him doing this courtesy to the dead man.
Well, why is he assuming that he's going to go to heaven if he's ambitious and a rebel and is tyrannous?
What do you want? What do you want to happen to your enemies? Ideally, if you're a Christian,
You say,
You want them
we don't
to
think like
repent.
this.
You want them to repent
you want them to repent and be
and
forgiven.
be forgiven, but he
That's
has
what's
to
wrong with
repent.
Hamlet saying, "Would I have met my dearest foe in heaven, or ever I had seen that day?" The worst thing that can happen is, or the next to worst thing that can happen is your worst enemy going to heaven. The worst thing is your mother marrying this evil uncle. All right, that's a mistake in Hamlet. That's his flaw that has to be corrected. What's his name? Prince Hal is not thinking like that. He is assuming heaven. He's assuming that he did the best he could, that he will be forgiven by God. And he's not going to make a federal case of his sins.
But don't you have to repent to be forgiven
Yeah,
by God?
yeah.
And Percy hasn't repented.
Well, Percy is recognizing his mortality at the end, at least. But you're right, it's not formal repentance. But this play is not so concerned with his soul after death. This play is concerned with what honor is. And the prince is being shown to us to be honorable even to his enemies when they are of some value. Yeah,
Which is the ultimate Christ-like.
that's right.
I think he's not assuming he's going to heaven. He's saying, may you go to heaven, may your sins be forgotten and lie with you in the grave, and may you go to heaven. So it's a generous spirit. He's wishing, but he's not.
Yes, let you take your praise with you to heaven. Let that happen. Yeah, you could read it that way too, yes. Now he looks around and he sees Falstaff dead. What, old acquaintance? Could not all this flesh keep in a little life? Poor Jack, farewell. I could have better spared a better man. Oh, I should have a heavy miss of thee if I were much in love with vanity. Heavy and light. Vanity is lightness, right? Moral lightness. So we got heavy and light. Death hath not struck so fat a deer today, though many dearer in this bloody fray. Embowelled, that means embalmed, will I see thee by and by. Till then, in blood, my noble Percy lie. And he goes out. He's not in tears. He's not destroyed. He's not miserable. It's a meaningful sacrifice for the good of the kingdom. I'll miss you. And then all of a sudden, much to our surprise, Falstaff riseth up. Embowelled? If thou embowel me today, I'll give you leave to powder me and eat me too tomorrow. It's blood, which was time to counterfeit. Or that hot termagant Scot had paid me Scot and lot too. Counterfeit? I lie. I am no counterfeit. To die is to be a counterfeit. For he is but the counterfeit of a man who hath not the life of a man. But to counterfeit dying when a man thereby liveth is to be no counterfeit, but the true and perfect image of life indeed. The better part of valor is discretion, in the which better part I have saved my life. Now we know that phrase, discretion is the better part of valor, this is where it comes from. It's probably in use before that, but Falstaff makes it famous. And the problem with these quotes from Shakespeare is, there's of course truth in it. You can't just be valorous without discretion. It's foolhardiness, as Plato pointed out. On the other hand, not sufficient valor and all discretion is cowardice. So those are opposites, and you want the golden mean. Aristotle has this great thing about the golden mean. Okay, fine. But Falstaff's definition of discretion is to sacrifice everything for his own selfish life. Then he looks down and he sees the dead person and he says, zounds, that is by God's wounds. I am afraid of this gunpowder Percy, though he be dead. How if he should counterfeit too and rise? Now why is that particularly funny? Can you imagine Percy counterfeiting death to avoid death? No. By my faith, I'm afraid he would prove the better counterfeit. Yeah, because he's really dead. Therefore I'll make him sure, yea, and I'll swear I killed him. Why may not he rise as well as I? Nothing confutes me but eyes, and nobody sees me. Nothing confutes me but eyes.
Nobody's here to see it, so
Nobody's here to see it.
contradict.
Therefore, who can deny it? So where does his reality lie? It lies in, like Hotspur's, in the eyes of others. And he can get away with anything if nobody sees him. This is why that whole business about hacking his sword and pretending that he fought with, 11 buckram men grown out of two, etc. He lies and lies and lies and lies. And as long as he has an argument, it's fine. He's no moral compass. He doesn't have a moral compass. He's not being seen by the eyes of God as far as he's concerned. Therefore, Sirrah, with a new wound in your thigh, come you along with me. He stabs him in the thigh, the dead Hotspur, he stabs him in the thigh. And he lifts him up and puts him on his shoulder. Enter the prince and Prince John of Lancaster. Come, brother John. Full bravely hast thou fleshed thy maiden swords. But soft, whom have we here? I said he was the Duke of Lancaster before, but I think he's not Duke. I think he's Prince. I think he's also Prince. What is he called? Yeah, Prince John of Lancaster. Sorry, that was a mistake. They see Hotspur, they see Falstaff carrying Hotspur. But soft, whom have we here? Did you not tell me this fat man was dead? I did. I saw him dead. I saw him dead. Ba-bum, ba-bum. Or maybe better, did you not tell me this fat man was dead? Ba-bum, ba-bum. I did. I saw him dead. You could put that space, the director could put that space either before or after. Breathless and bleeding on the ground. I think it has to come before, because I saw him dead, breathless and bleeding on the ground. Art thou alive, or is it fantasy that plays upon our eyesight? I prithee speak, we will not trust our eyes without our ears. Thou art not what thou seemst. No, that's certain, I am not a double man. But if I be not Jack Falstaff, then am I a Jack. There's Percy. He throws down the body of Percy. If your father will do me any honor, so. If not, let him kill the next Percy himself. I look to be either Earl or Duke, I can assure you.
Who takes credit?
Why, Percy, I killed myself and saw thee dead. Didst thou? Lord, Lord, how this world is given to lying. I grant you I was down and out of breath, and so was he. But we rose both at an instant and fought a long hour by Shrewsbury clock. If I may be believed, so. If not, let them that should reward valor bear the sin upon their own heads. I'll take it upon my death I gave him this wound in the thigh. If the man were alive and would deny it, zounds, I would make him eat a piece of my soul. John, this is the strangest tale that ever I heard. Prince, this is the strangest fellow, brother John. Come, bring your luggage nobly on your back. For my part, if a lie may do thee grace, I'll gild it with the happiest terms I have. Okay, I'll support you. You killed Percy, got up. I killed him, and then he got up, and then you killed him. Fine. Why? Because he knows where his honor lies. It doesn't just lie in the opinion of others. The trumpet sounds retreat, the day is ours. Come, brother, let's to the highest of the field to see what friends are living who are dead. And Falstaff says, I'll follow as they say for reward. He that rewards me, God reward him. Just the opposite of the prince to Hotspur, right? If I do grow great, meaning get promoted, I'll grow less, for I'll purge and leave sack, and live cleanly as a nobleman should do. Now, the idea that anybody's going to make him a nobleman is far-fetched. All right, Act 5, Scene 5. The last scene. Thus ever did rebellion find rebuke, says the king. Ill-spirited Worcester, they've taken him alive. Did not we send grace, pardon, and terms of love to all of you? And wouldst thou turn our offers contrary? Misuse the tenor of thy kinsman's trust? 3 knights upon our party slain today, a noble earl and many a creature else, had been alive this hour, if like a Christian thou hadst truly borne betwixt our armies true intelligence. He knows what's happened. He knows Worcester lies to Hotspur. What I have done my safety urged me to, and I embrace this fortune patiently, since not to be avoided falls on me. King, bear Worcester to the death, and Vernon too. Other offenders we will pause. Now that's pretty interesting. We're not going to kill everybody. We're just going to kill these 2 fomenters of rebellion. And Vernon, though he saw what the prince was, seconded the lie of Worcester. So he's guilty too. How goes the field? The prince says, the noble Scot, Lord Douglas, when he saw the fortune of the day quite turned from him, the noble Percy slain, and all his men upon the foot of fear, fled with the rest. And falling from a hill, he was so bruised that the pursuers took him. At my tent the Douglas is, and I beseech your grace I may dispose of him. How did the conflict start? Hotspur refused to give the king the prisoners. What is the prince doing? I've got the Douglas guarded in my tent. I beg you to let me dispose of him. It's up to you. My prisoners are yours. And the king says, with all my heart. Right away, jumps on his line. I may dispose of him with all my heart. Do what you want with him. And the prince then says, then, brother John of Lancaster, to you this honorable bounty shall belong. Go to the Douglas and deliver him up to his pleasure, ransomless and free. His valors shown upon our crest today have taught us how to cherish such high deeds, even in the bosom of our adversaries. So what does he do? He frees the Douglas. He wants to make friends of the Scots. He's showing mercy to them. He's showing honor. And instead of doing it himself, he's giving it to his brother to do. And what does his brother say? I thank your grace for this high courtesy, which I shall give away immediately. Now compare to Hotspur. Mine, I'm killing you to get your honor. I want it. I want the honor. Now, the honor is being given from person to person. From the king to the prince. From the prince to his brother. From his brother to the Douglas. This is how you run a kingdom with honor. Now the king says, because the story isn't over, then this remains, that we divide our power. You, son John, and my cousin Westmoreland towards York, shall bend you with your dearest speed to meet Northumberland and the prelate Scroop. Remember we saw them talking. the Archbishop of York, talking in Act 4, Scene 4. And I said the tide was turning. Now they're going, they were right, that the king's going to turn against them the moment he's defeated Hotspur. Who, as we hear, are busily in arms. Myself and you, son Harry, will toward Wales to fight with Glendower and the Earl of March, that's Mortimer. Rebellion in this land shall lose his sway, meeting the check of such another day. And since this business so fair is done, and since this busyness so fair is done, let us not leave till all our own be won. Monosyllables at the end of the play. Well, the next play has more battles, because there are more rebels to be fought. But finally, the king prevails. But not against all the complainants, the potential rebels, who are going to turn against Henry V, his son, when the time comes. So I just want to say another word about structure, and then I'll take questions. This play is, if you could bottle Shakespeare's talent and visionary gift, you could use this play as a textbook instruction in how to construct a play. The first thing is, in all the plays and all the language, antithesis. Antithesis in every line. Antithesis makes drama in the speeches, in the images. Honor, dishonor, catechism. Does it, can honor set to a leg? No. Yes, no. Antithesis in the structure of the scenes. So we go from a comic scene to a serious scene, to a comic scene to a serious scene, but not in lockstep. We go to a scene that's kind of half comic and half serious, when we're with Mortimer and Hotspur and Worcester and Glendower. It's serious. They're unmaking England, but it's also very funny to see Glendower's ego and Hotspur punctured. So you have antithesis of seriousness and comedy. You have then antithesis of characters, and we all know the term foil characters. A foil character, I don't know if I've reminded you lately where it comes from. Foil, we all know tin foil and aluminum foil. So there's also such a thing as silver foil and gold foil, and it means metal beaten flat to paper thin flatness. And it used to be put behind jewels in settings, it probably still is, to set off the jewel by contrast, and also to reflect light back through the jewel. So a foil is the background of a bright jewel. And a foil character is that in terms of character. He is like the other character in the sense that we are tempted to make the comparison. But he's unlike, and that brings out those qualities of differentness that we want to see. Now, Shakespeare, in his mature period, is doing this with every character in the play. There isn't anybody who's not a foil for everybody else. In Hamlet, everybody's a foil for Hamlet, and they're foils for each other. And in this play, we have a three-way set of foils going on, plus the others. We have, remember, the ostler, Robin Ostler, who died, and the inn goes to pot. And that's a way of talking about Richard being deposed and the kingdom going to warfare, civil war. You have the gardener in Richard II talking about how we preserve the garden from the weeds, and how the king hasn't been preserving the kingdom from the people who are its weeds. In this play, we have Henry, who is right with questionable merit, raising up all this rebellion. And in the back of our minds, of course, we have Richard with merit, with right, but no merit. Here we've got merit with at least questionable right. But who's going to inherit from him? Is this going to be another example? Is there going to be another Richard on the throne? And that now we've got Richard and Prince Hal to be foils for each other. The previous king and the future king, right? Before and after Henry IV. And so is he going to be like Richard? And the king spells this out explicitly. For all the world now, are you like Richard was then? That was a disaster for the kingdom. But it's only an image. It isn't really true, as it turns out. So within the three who are, in a sense, vying for government of the prince, who is going to be the next king, meaning the government of England, we have the prince himself, we have Falstaff, and we have Hotspur. And they represent three completely different principles of government. Three principles of governing the self that Plato talked about, and three principles of governing the state. And what is honor is treated by each of those principles differently. So what has Prince Hal got to do? He's got to become king with honor. If he doesn't have honor, if they don't see him as honorable, which includes legitimate, England is going to be cursed with rebellion nonstop. It turns out it is, until Richard III. But he doesn't know that, and he's got to do the best he can. And temporarily he succeeds, as we'll see. But in the meantime, he's got to understand what true honor is if he's going to be the kind of king that he wants to be. And he knows right from the start, it does not lie in externals. It lies in character. It lies in the right ordering of the self, putting as most important what is most important. Now, what does Falstaff put as most important? The lowest part of himself. And all other honor and all other values are sacrificed to that, including the serious part where he leads his soldiers to be peppered. And we'll see some more examples in part 2. He doesn't care about England. He doesn't care about even reputation. I would that I knew where a commodity of good names were to be bought. He's willing to buy a good name. It's nice to have a good name, but he doesn't want to earn it. And then we have Hotspur, who is this what?
I just think he started with a good name if it's a class thing, because he was Sir John Falstaff. So.
Yes, well, last week I talked about his knighthood a little bit. We're not told how he became a knight. It's possible that when he was young, he was more of a fighter. I doubt it. He might have been a carpet knight.
But I think he's very confident that he has power because he has high class, and that he doesn't think there's anything wrong with getting rid of those who are not in his class. I think that's.
We're talking about Falstaff?
I am, and I'm thinking that's part of his.
Getting rid of people who are not in his class.
Yeah, the soldiers.
I see.
Yeah, the raggedy tag soldiers. He doesn't think of them as worthy of his caring.
Who does he think of as worthy of his caring?
Himself.
Right.
No, so the next question I was going to ask is he his own foil?
Well, in a sense, that's true. He has a catechism,
Yes.
and he asks about honor and all these ideas of honor, which might be true. Doesn't honor live after you among the dead? And he tears that down. So yeah, he's his own foil in a sense. He represents the world. So he's, in a sense, every man, but he represents an absolute commitment to the worldliness of the world. And he is the enemy of true honor. I think he gets his entitlement not just from his own selfishness, but from his friendship with the prince. Now, the prince is using him for his purposes. Falstaff doesn't really understand that. But he thinks, Falstaff thinks, when this prince becomes king, I'm going to have my way with him. Just like who?
Richard's lackeys and.
Yes? More important, more immediate?
The Mortimers and all those guys.
Worcester. When I make him king, he's going to do what I tell him. And Falstaff says, when thou art king, do not thou hang a thief. Remember that? No, thou shalt. All right, so he is going to use the prince, if he can, to have his own way in England, which is to satisfy all his self-indulgent pleasure. And the prince is smarter than he takes him for, and is using him to create this smokescreen of worldliness and self-indulgence that isn't really true about him. But I was moving on to Hotspur, the other foil, who represents also a limited and faulty, a little bit more noble, but not perfect idea of honor. Why? Because he's all heart, he's all courage, he's all fight, he's all name and reputation and collar, and doesn't take into consideration the whole. He doesn't take into consideration other virtues like loyalty or like looking out for the good of the kingdom. It doesn't matter as long as he, as egotistical as Falstaff in a sense, but not about superficial things like food and drink, but about reputation. And he gives his whole life to that. But it's not good enough. It's not what England needs. England needs a man who is as familiar with the worldliness of the world as Prince Hal becomes by hanging out with these guys, and as courageous as Hotspur in a noble fight, but not the victim of those lower concepts of honor, rather devoted to the higher good. And that is not just his own good, but the good of everyone, including the whole kingdom. Yes?
So, was there a trope like Falstaff from the Greeks?
Parts of Falstaff. The braggart soldier is ancient, yes. The Roman comedy.
But the
No,
extravagance of Falstaff.
it's not just the extravagance, it's the wit.
Yeah.
It's the brilliant cleverness of self-indulgence that Shakespeare invents in Falstaff. So great is it that someone like Harold Bloom goes really off the deep end and says that Shakespeare invented the human being. And he thinks that Falstaff is his greatest creation.
Yeah.
He has created the concept of the human person by giving us this Falstaff come along. Now, I think that's ridiculous. There have been plenty of individual human beings before Shakespeare invented Falstaff. But there's a grain of truth to what he's saying. That is, Shakespeare has so commanded the language of imagination that he's been able to give, and the language of drama, that he's been able to create these characters who live as if they were historical individuals in our imaginations, unlike anybody else. So, yes, Falstaff is like Santa Claus, but he's not Santa Claus. Yes, he's like the braggart soldier, but he's not just a braggart soldier. Yes, he's like this, that, and the other, but he is not like any of them in reality. He's unique, and he lives in us, in our imagination because of that. And it's all because of the words. It just comes to us through the medium of language and the handling of language and poetry. Yes?
So let me just suggest something, and I hadn't really thought of it before now, but you take Falstaff, he's a liar, an inveterate liar.
Yes.
He has no loyalty to anybody other than to himself. He has an obsession with crowd size, people that he's fought. And he's sort of a clown until you give him responsibility for people.
I know
Right.
somebody else.
And then he leads them all to their death and doom.
Correct. Which is why, in part 2, the new King Henry V must
Yeah.
banish him 10 miles from his presence at
Right.
all times.
But
Not only to show the world
yeah.
that he is no longer possessed by this old white-bearded Satan,
Right.
but to to teach him a lesson and to secure the awareness that this is not the way to run a kingdom.
Right.
Richard, if Falstaff were involved in any way in running the kingdom, it would go to ruin the way it did with Richard.
Right. So maybe.
And Hal knows that lesson.
Yeah, so maybe today that's something to keep in mind come November.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're getting at?
Why was King Henry V invade France in her story?
Oh, that's a good question. We're going to talk about
Oh,
that. For one thing, his father tells him it's a good way to unify the English.
okay.
But you have to remember that it is their inheritance from hundreds of years before. The English ruled in parts of France, on and off for a long time. And all those wars were about wars of hegemony. And marriages took place. So it doesn't last, of course.
No.
And we think of England as just this island. But the English, there were many English kings who were the liege lords of various provinces of France.
Nice.
They were a huge empire
Yeah.
in,
Right.
in Africa, the New World.
Yes. Yes.
So just a couple of things I ran across this. The monarchs of England call themselves kings of France until like 1803 or something, when there was a treaty with Napoleon where the Brits gave that up. But I guess I'm still.
That was the peace that then didn't last.
That didn't last.
So went back to war, yeah.
So, but I'm still, I mean, isn't it a little ironic that King Henry is inveighing against rebellion and the hurly-burly or whatever that term was? I mean, it's sort of.
Well, we're going to see when it comes to Henry V that the war in France is not a rebellion.
No, but I mean against Richard.
Against Richard. Yes, but remember what was happening under Richard. It was hurly-burly innovation in the sense that he was leasing out England, as John of Gaunt said, with his dying breath, and ruining everything. So it needed somebody to stop that. That was the disaster that Henry felt he was putting an end to, and he did put an end to it. Now, rebelling against him is going back to that, and we see it in the Mortimer, Worcester, Glendower scenes where they're dividing up England, which is, for the audience, a perfect prescription for disaster. And we can identify with that to a certain extent if we think about the Civil War. You know, Lincoln is faced with a question. All right, maybe we should have two nations. One slave and one free, and then we don't have to fight a war, and, divide it up. But he had a higher principle. The higher principle was the unity of the nation under God, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, etc., and government of the people, by the people, for the people. And the South was destroying the whole. I mean, there were all kinds of economic reasons too, of course.
3/5 of a person.
I'm sorry?
All that.
Yeah. So the point is that there's always been this choice, but the result of saying, no, we're going to secede, we're going to have a rebellion, in our imagination now, because we're all anti-slavery, right? We don't want the South to have won and perpetuated slavery, so the good guys won. So we look back and we say, look at all the bloodshed that was caused because you wanted to secede from the Union. And we don't think that Lincoln was fomenting hurly-burly innovation by saying, no, we're not letting you do that. So there's some parallels there. You can think about it that way. But that's why we read Richard II first, to remember what it was. I mean, England is being run by Bushy, Bagot, and Green, and that might as well be run by Falstaff. Although we love Falstaff much more, yes.
How does Christ fit into the sort of view of the world where there's like the fall and then kind of the decline of the world after that? Because he's kind of a new creation.
Well, he is the promised Redeemer, and everybody in Shakespeare's world believes in the redemption through Christ. That's why there's hope. But it's not redemption of the of the historical world.
Right, okay.
It's not now that Christ is. I mean, this is why the Jews parted company with the Christians, because the Jews say that when this Messiah comes, we're not going to have wars, we're not going to have sins and villainy and corruption and destruction. That's going to be over. And the Christians said, no, this Messiah came, but all of that stuff doesn't matter because it's about the soul going to heaven. Forget the history of the world, which is going onward and downward to the ending doom, right? To the last wars and Armageddon and all the ending stuff. That's why the book of Revelation made it into the New Testament. The book of Revelation is one of the most bizarre and extreme, strange, metaphorical works ever written. But it's part of the of Holy Writ, because it says that the end of times will be this great conflagration of disaster and so on. And that's not what Christ came to save people from. He came to save them from eternal death and damnation. Okay, so everybody in Shakespeare's world believes this. And you have them in this play. It's not a main issue. Christianity is not up for discussion here, as it is in some ways in Hamlet or King Lear. Here it's just assumed, but people are taking their oaths on the cross, and they're swearing by God, and it's all there. There's no, Christ isn't left out of it. It's just that Shakespeare's not a preacher, for one thing, and for another, in a historical play, he doesn't want to get into Protestant Catholic areas of friction because it's dangerous. So he treats Christianity as the content of Christianity for Shakespeare in his plays is that which all Christians believe in. Protestant, Catholic, Puritan, whatever, the basic doctrine is shared. And that's what he puts forward. And where there are conflicts between them, like sectarian conflict, he generally tries to steer clear of them. He does give us purgatory in Hamlet a little bit, but he sets it in the past and in a foreign country. So it doesn't do any damage to his reputation in England. But he won't get into he will get into debates about how much free will do we have? Did Ophelia kill herself or not? That's a question which we can't answer, and no Christian can answer, because we don't know. We can't see into another's soul, and everybody agrees about that. So we can show people trying to do that and then say, that doesn't work, we can't know another person's soul.
Thoughts are the slaves of the night.
Yes. Yes. So it pervades everything, but it's not, they're not arguing about Christ in this play. They're arguing about honor and it's a hard question for a Christian prince. You're supposed to turn the other cheek, but a Christian prince who turns the other cheek is not running the country very well. So you can't do that. You have to be imitating God in dispensing justice. And the king is trying to do that as close as he can. He does have Worcester and Vernon executed, but he'll take the others one by one based on what they really did. And originally he shows mercy if they will accept it. That's Christ-like. I mean, even Christianity says, if you don't repent and accept Christ, then forget it, you're lost. So he gives Worcester the opportunity to do that in Hotspur, and they reject. Did you have a question?
I was just thinking that I thought, you guys read the introduction, everybody, probably all did, but it said here that we got inkling that Hell was going to be a fine king, because it says that as a prospective ruler, however, Hell doesn't inspire confidence and even admiration, for it is his command of language and his appearance that he is best suited to thrive in this new world, and perhaps allow others to thrive with him. When he allows Falstaff to claim credit for delivering Hotspur's death blow, he promises to make his dissolute friend appear in glorious light, and hence, potentially himself as well. And given that no one will believe Falstaff capable of such a thing, the prince reaps a double profit for acquiring a reputation for selflessness. It's a complex and not altogether savory act.
Not altogether what?
Savory act.
Now, well, See, I was going to say he's half right, but now he's only a third right. It's perfectly savory. Yes, it says more about him than it does about Falstaff. But it's not in any general thing about, how he treats people in the new world. That's projection backward from our concerns. It's noble what he does, and selfless, and magnanimous. He's got the quality needed in a king, which is magnanimity, great soul. But it's not just the great heart, and it's not just the great body, it's the great soul. And I'll end there.